There's this very simple framework that I usually talk to people about. It's called the EAST framework. It says when you make things easy, attractive, social, and timely, people tend to do it more. So if something's easier, do it more often. If something is attractive, so, it makes it easy for you to realize that the call to action that you don't want people to click on, you have to make it a little more difficult. Like how Amazon Prime tried to
Yeah,
like make it super hard for people to sign out of Prime and paid all the fine. There is
yeah.
that framework, and there's this other framework called Mindspace.
Welcome to the Mixed Emotions podcast. This is your host, Mihir Oak. Thank you so much for accepting. That is point number one. This podcast is around human behavior with a lot of context. It depends. We speak about science, we speak about technology, we speak about context related conversations, keeping the human experience at the center of things, and how life is not black and white, and it's a lot of million shades of gray, and it all depends on your context architecture. If I had to introduce you, you are the founder of Beyond Nudge, founder and CEO of Beyond Nudge. You are also founder of the IBAN network, that is the Indian Behavioral Economics Network. And you've worked across the globe with big names, UNICEF, Swiggy, Google, promoting and ensuring that we can use behavioral science knowledge to propagate business in general. Can you just give me an explanation of what behavioral science is? What is the difference between that and psychology,
Yeah, so
if
I'll
you
just
can? Yeah.
expand it a little bit. So we don't necessarily work just on business problems. We also work on development sector problems. So we work on problems like how do we make children stay in school? How do we make people honk less? Work on all of those problems as well. So behavioral science is absolutely anything that has anything to do with decision making. So we study how people process various information, how we think, how we make decisions. So the entire process of understanding how we make decisions is a lot of behavioral science there. Right? And the main difference between the core field of psychology and behavioral science for me is that psychology also covers a lot of other aspects. Like psychology does cover behavioral science, but it also covers a lot of other aspects like mental disorders and so on, which behavioral scientists typically don't touch upon. And behavioral science itself is a field that has aspects from a lot of other fields. So we take insights from psychology, from microeconomics, a lot of microeconomics actually, game theory, anthropology, culture, history, everything plays a big role in behavioral science. To understand how a person behaves, we look at themselves, that person itself, we look at their family, we look at their surroundings, we also look at the country context they're from, the religious context they're from, their background, the history of their country, everything affects our behavior. So for instance, if you're from a very conflict prone country, you would be a specific, a very risk averse person who's scared of taking risks because you have to be, right? Versus if you're from a very secure country, your behavior is totally different. So behavioral science is super broad, and it's really great for me specifically because I love dabbling through a lot of these fields. Yeah.
Yeah, I did go through a lot of the videos that you had put out on your Ben YouTube channel. Almost 300 videos. And there is a point of neuroscience also that is involved in context. And a lot of David Eagleman's videos, which are very fascinating to read up on. Do you ever go back into or down the rabbit hole of understanding how we become or how our neurons fire, and that is how maybe our behavior is shaped, and why do they fire in this way and not in that way? Or is it more, I mean, is it research versus non-research? What is your inclination towards
So
it?
yeah, David is one of my favorite writers, and he inspired me long ago when I started off in this field. And I myself tried to train myself a little bit in neuroscience as well because it just was super important. And it's very fascinating how a lot of things change the way we behave. So, for instance, I think actually David talks about it in his book itself, either in the book, I'm guessing in the book Brain. He talks about
Yeah.
how sometimes people who commit certain crimes, even pedophiles, when certain tumors and stuff were removed from their brain, they were no longer doing it. So, a lot of our behavior is also very biological, right? You might have seen some people who just typically look at life from a very positive perspective, and some people who look at life in a very negative perspective. Sometimes it's very chemical and biological. It's about the kind of neurotransmitters that your body generates, right?
Yeah.
So they create a lot of happy hormones, and you're just a happy person. So
Like
that
it's
in
a lot of genetics as well. There's
absolutely,
you
yeah, yeah,
in
and it again affects all your behavior, including your financial decisions. If you're a generally positive person, you're more optimistic. You take more riskier
yeah.
choices. So
Yeah.
everything is super tight, and it's so complex and very fascinating.
Yeah. Do you think though that we have covered or we have dissected every like all the ways that humans can behave and then create our frameworks around them? Like normally I would assume that if companies came to you with a problem, they would want a problem to be solved behaviorally. Like I would want a particular behavior to be my outcome orientation. Has there ever been a time where you have received a problem statement that lies outside your understanding of how humans could behave? Is this the right question to ask? Is
Yeah,
there, have we mapped out all our behaviors in a way that they fit
not
in
at
all our
all.
frameworks?
Like in my perspective, I don't think we've even mapped out like 20-30% of how humans behave and the biology, even the biology that goes behind it. I think there's so much that's left untapped. There's so much really cool research coming out now, right, in protein synthesis and stuff, and how our neurotransmitters actually work and how they talk to each other, how our neurons talk to each other, how they communicate, and how small different things, including temperature, the time of the day, and other things affects these things.
Yes.
There's so much research to be done. Like I don't think we have tapped into much at all, to be very honest. So yeah, when we do try to solve business problems, we are faced with this very constrained amount of literature that we have, and we try to make sense of stuff with the amount of information and research that we have, which to me is very basic. So yeah, we talk about all these biases of people talk about loss aversion and this and that and everything. And if you really sit and
Yeah.
think about it, a lot of things are the same things in slightly different contexts, and we have given different names to it. And people don't even acknowledge that. And researchers work in, they claim themselves to work in two different fields when they're actually working on the same thing, but from a different perspective. So to
Right.
me, because behavioral science as a field itself emerged very late, I personally
Yeah.
think we are very much at the early stage of understanding how we think and make decisions.
Would there be any frameworks, though, common frameworks for anybody to take and implement, knowing what we already know in the field of what works? As in, if this is context A, then humans are going to more likely than not exhibit that only specific behavior. And there is hardly a chance where they deviate from that particular behavior. And to elicit that behavior, would there be some frameworks, easily implementable frameworks that anybody can implement?
Obviously, there aren't existing patterns. My job won't exist. So there are patterns that we have
Yes.
observed, and there are patterns that we use to predict behavior. So that's based on what we work. There are a lot of existing frameworks, but frameworks to me is an oversimplification of reality. You probably know how
Yes.
complex human behavior is, right? Let's just take like a small example of falling for peer pressure. It's such a
Yeah.
small, simplistic topic, but if you actually think about it, it's extremely complex, and there's like a billion different things playing a role, including how your parents treated you when you were a child, right? It affects your probability of falling for peer pressure or not. So there's like hundreds and thousands of variables every time going into it. So if you try to explain a behavior with a framework, so there's a lot of nice frameworks out there. There's something called the mind space, there's something called combi model, and so on. But when you try to explain behaviors using these frameworks, you are trying to oversimplify the reality. So that said, I currently, when I started off, I did use the frameworks, and they were very useful at that point, because when you're starting off, you lack that ability to come up with ideas out of thin air. But eventually, I think it's good for everyone to take a step back and realize that it's not as simple as it looks when you look at these frameworks. So, yeah, I don't particularly use any framework anymore, but rather just approach every problem like it's a new problem and try to understand exactly what's going on. Because I've been personally proven over and again that my intuition of what I think the problem could be because of is wrong. And most behavioral scientists would empathize with me here. So we often approach a problem and we have seen something very similar in the past and you're like, okay, this is the exact same thing. This is because of probably because of the same thing, right? And you go there and you realize it's not, like absolutely not. Yeah, like every problem is so unique and so different. So I typically shy away from frameworks, but that said, there's a
So
couple.
I sorry, yeah, go on. I would like to hear the frameworks, and then there'll be a question which is I agree with you that I mean I don't think a particular framework would justify any problem that comes your way because it is so unpredictable and context is so huge. And I guess it is a starting point for kids and for freshers and for amateurs to get into the field because they'll require some handholding and they'll require some structure. And I guess once you have some experience, you don't really, then you realize ki, theek hai, now you're into the field. Now you don't require that structure. Now it's all hell's broken loose and now it's your way of figuring stuff out. But still, any frameworks that any, let's say, tech startups could use, or product designers could use, product management people could use for.
There's this very simple framework that I usually talk to people about. It's called the EAST framework. It says when you make things easy, attractive, social, and timely, people tend to do it more. So if something's easier, do it more often. If something is attractive, so, it makes it easy for you to realize that the call to action that you don't want people to click on, you have to make it a little more difficult. Like how Amazon Prime tried to
Yeah,
like make it super hard for people to sign out of Prime and paid all the fine. There is
yeah,
that framework, and there's this other framework called Mindspace. But again, it's also another framework which talks about like messenger and various different things that kind of drive behavior. The way I see framework is, let's say you want to teach a robot to draw, you would probably start off by saying draw a specific circle, draw a perfect rectangle here, blah blah blah, and to build a human. But eventually when someone is an artist, you don't do that anymore. You let them just free flow and sketch because they have the intuition of how it works. So that way frameworks are super helpful when you're starting off. But when you keep using these
yeah.
frameworks, you realize where all we deviate from the framework, and eventually you make it like a little more context dependent. And that said, I've been thinking about it for a while, but I think we do need like a behavioral science framework, which is specifically for the Indian context, because our Indian behavior is pretty different from the most researched, the Western behavior, right? So all these frameworks are from West. So
What what do you mean by that? Do you mean that it is a developing versus a developed country mindset? Is it because there is more research that, or there are more clinical trials that happen in the West that they're the like human, and also when we talk about human behavior, there is it's and this science and the science of psychology, we are not essentially studying the human brain, even though
mm,
we're not going on to dissection of the brain and understanding brain structure and neurons, and we are all the inferences that we make come out of experiences that come out of our verbal way of communication, and
yeah,
then you map it out and so on.
yeah,
um
yeah.
Again, context dependent.
Yeah,
uh
so there's two parts to your question. So the first part is about why I said most of the research is from the West. So most of the research, behavioral science at least, has been led by the Western countries. So we call these the weird countries, the Western educated, industrial, developed countries. So the main difference to me and to most people is that we are a very collectivistic society and they're a very individualistic society. So the thing is, we care so much about what, I mean, on average, Indians we care a lot about what others think of us, while people might not necessarily live the same way. It has its good and bads. The society as a whole comes and helps out when someone is in trouble in, let's say, a very rural part of the country here. That's not the case in, let's say, US or somewhere where it's a very individualistic society. So that plus, as I said, the history is so different. We were colonized by some people who are doing research on their people. So the mentality and the way we live, the way we have been taught to behave is just so different. And again, I think religion and all of those things matter because, we like it or not, religion on whole has had a big impact on society as a whole, right?
Yes.
A country which is majorly Hindu might have all the tendencies that are taught by Hinduism. So that behavior could be very different from how other people might behave. That is one thing. The second thing, you spoke about how we haven't actually dissected the brain and actually learned what's going on. So there's a lot of issues to it. Firstly, you're talking about the core level problem. There's like more problems to it. So most of the research that we have now is actually stuff that people say they do. So for instance, researchers go and ask them, in this context, if someone gave you these two options, what would you pick? So they say, okay, I would have picked this. So it's a very hypothetical question, and that's where we've derived ourselves from.
Yes.
So not
Yes.
even from what people did, which itself is like second degree in my opinion. So this we call as the say do gap, which is the gap between what someone says and what someone does. And there's this other
Mm-hmm.
level of what goes on in a biological level in your brain. I told you how I used to dabble a little bit in neuroscience in the past. So we used to run a lot of neuroscience experiments where we actually look at brain signals, and very in a very basic way, but we do look at which part of the brain lights up, for instance, when certain kind of decisions are made. Does someone get excited when they look at food, or do they not? And how does it affect their
Mm-hmm.
choices when they're picking between two food choices, for instance? So we do look at those things. To me, that is a better way
Yeah.
of understanding people's behavior than actually what people are doing in reality.
Okay. So to follow up on your second question then, is that the neuroscience, the scientific approach of understanding human behavior, because in the end there has to be a connection between what is going on here and on inside the nerves of my body, and that is
Yeah.
eliciting my behavior, and that is driven not only by my visual or my perceptions of like my sensory perceptions, also driven by genetics, also driven by composition, chemical composition, and that together then gives me human behavior. And that should ideally be the way that we should study human behavior, and all of that drives human behavior, and then the context comes, and then that further elicits reaction, and then our study of it, and then our analysis. So that is the ideal way of going about it, which you're saying is different than what we see in other countries.
Yeah, that if everything changes in every perspective, right? The genetics is different between countries. Forget countries. Let's just take two different states that are next to each other. The behaviors are just, and when we do run certain very basic tests, we realize that it changes so much between people. We hate to admit it, but it changes so much between people from different religion. It changes from person who's a parent versus a couple who doesn't have children. It changes between men and women. It changes
Yeah.
between, it's just so different. It's basically very impossible for us, or it's very unfortunate that we even have to aggregate this data and tell it at like country level. So behavior is a very individual thing, and which makes us feel really complex to study. If you think about it, to be a good behavioral scientist, you need to know a lot. You need to learn psychology, you need to know economics, you need to learn like a little bit of neuroscience at least, very basic biology at least. And you need to apply it somewhere. So you need to learn that field. So, for instance, if I'm applying it in business, then I need to learn a little bit of how businesses work, how people interact there. So, there's just like a vast amount of stuff that needs to be covered for someone to be a good behavioral science person. Yeah, I do sometimes feel like the field on,
Overwhelmed?
I feel like we're
Too
not
much?
doing justice to what we should, in the sense that unless you're a very curious human and you're reading extensively, you're not doing justice to your work when you're in this field. So there's a lot going on all the damn time. And again, we also use data all the time. So you also need to know a little bit of data analysis. And if you're interested in running experiments and if you're doing any lab experiment, then you need to learn how to code your experiment. A little bit of programming there. So it's really fun if you like learning, but not so fun if you're not someone who's into it. Yeah,
Wow. So you need to be deeply and passionate and really curious and have that thinking and learning mindset on all the time. And like to
absolutely.
my mind, that to my mind, I think it's fascinating that you get to learn all the time about how people behave the way they behave, why they do what they do, and also involve tech in it. You learn how to code, you learn how to read data, you learn how to analyze. You get real time information, you get real time feedback on the experiments that you run. And more than anything, I think, like, in the end, I guess it's about also making money out of these learnings and applying your knowledge to then you would call yourself a consultant, right? Behavioral economics consultant. Or so if I was a student and I had to get into this field and I did not like coding or I did not like some aspect of it, like, it could be human behavior, it could be used in marketing, it could be used in advertising, it could be used in product design, it could be used in architecture, and you could also call yourself a consultant. There is not a department of behavioral economics or behavioral science, but these skills are used across the board. HR,
Yeah.
onboarding processes, customer support, it's all there.
Everywhere,
So
like anywhere humans
yeah.
interact with anyone or anything, there's human behavior. So even if you're designing, say, a washing machine, you need to use behavioral science to make people's life easier, right? You need to make sure you remind people that the washing machine is done and they need to take out the clothes. So behavioral science is pretty much applied everywhere, anywhere you can think of. Yeah.
But I would assume that the behavioral science part would come later on. The first would technically still be the product development part. It would still be technically the engineering first,
Mhm.
and then behavioral science would be, it'll be a super layer. It'll not be a core layer. It'll be the application front.
Similar to a website, for instance. So there's a lot of backend that we don't touch mostly, but we work on everything front end, right? So in an ideal case, I think my job shouldn't exist, in the sense that I think everyone should learn a little bit of behavioral science and apply it themselves, because they would know their context the best, right? There's no point
Yes.
in me going and checking if a designer's work is behaviorally sound. I ideally the designer should know a little bit of behavioral science. They don't need me. So I am hoping that in the next 15, 20 years, nobody hires me because everyone's learned behavioral science. That's the world that ideally we should be living in. Yeah.
Uh, Either that or businessman. I'm sure, like, in a management level, as you go up the ladder in corporate, you would ideally, your skills are lesser on the harder technical side of things, and it is more on the management side. You're managing teams and so on. So I'm sure that human interaction and how you manage teams and how you run teams and how you create culture would be more important in a business setting and less important in a technical setting.
And sometimes no. For instance, I've worked with some of my clients who have worked on simple things, like, let's say, there's a right way to code, there's a wrong way to code, and both codes would work, in the sense that in one the code is readable and someone else can read and understand your code and build on top of it. Another one, you've created this very messy design that only you can understand for the probably for the next 24, 48 hours, and then nobody would understand what's going on, right? So we've actually worked with a client on making people, technical folks, maintain these documentations properly, and we used a lot of behavioral science there to make people do that. So
But
you can.
don't you think that is common sense? Do you
Oh,
feel that
oh,
it is
oh,
common
oh, oh,
sense?
like a lot of work that we do is actually common sense.
Yeah, it does feel like it should be common sense, but people, why? Like, how do you think that people don't think about it? If I am a coder tomorrow and I am writing a setup, an application that is dependent on me, and I have to create handover documentation, if I don't document it properly, people are not going to be able to use what have
Yeah,
written,
yeah.
something which
Forget
is so critical.
handover. People
But
write
the
code in a way where they don't understand it the next time, so they spend a lot of hours looking at it. It's a basic behavioral science problem. We call it time inconsistency, where, or let's say, instant gratification, where you're trying to get your job done quickly now. You don't care so much about how much trouble it is later. It's the same as eating a lot now and regretting later, night binge eating, all of that
but
is the same. Or let's say not writing your assignments and then letting yourself struggle during the deadline. It's all kind of the same issue. We're like putting the problem for our future self so that our current self is lazy and happy. Yeah.
technically, so it puts it in a survival mindset. If I, in the sense that I would assume that if I'm eating everything now, it is because I don't know if I'm going to be alive later on, which is somewhat similar to this. If I get my job done now, it doesn't matter. I may not be there tomorrow to look at it. Uh, But then the common sense aspect should come, right? I don't know. Does it come with maturity? Does it come with experience? Because
No,
people,
uh,
that's the default way of thinking, that I will not document, I will not put in comments, I will not, even if it makes complete sense that you should, and you should also think like that. And default, the default is not to behave this way. Why would that be?
that's also the case everywhere, right? I was just going to add that it also doesn't come with behavioral science training. So just because someone's a behavioral scientist doesn't mean that they have fixed all their stuff as well. Let's take a slightly different example. Let's say someone wants to go to the gym every day. They don't. And often we actually know that we might not actually go to the gym, but we still end up buying the gym membership with the hope that we will go. But then when the
Yeah.
actual time comes, we actually don't go. And this is a problem that you might be thinking might not be the case for behavioral scientists because we're so trained at fixing this. But no, behavioral scientists have the same exact issues. So a lot of things play a role here. So the most primary thing, as I said, is instant gratification. That is a very strong thing. You mentioned how you don't know if you're going to be alive tomorrow, right? So that
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
probably one of the reasons why we have this behavior of gratifying ourselves today rather than worrying about what happens tomorrow. On top of that, there's a billion other things that goes on. As I said, everything behavior related, there's always a billion things that goes on there. But yeah, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just that you need to create systems that makes it work, because it could look like common sense, but if you really think about it, that's what humans are. Like, humans are hardwired to be lazy. We are hardwired to do the bare minimum needed in every single aspect, right? Which is why we have bonuses and stuff to create a structure that makes people work hard, or create a structure where they feel rewarded.
Would
So
there be a single system, or would there be a direction that gives you a system that allows, see, for example, if I run a now I work for a tech company and we have similar issues of non-documentation, not following systems, even if there are systems in place, not going ahead and using those systems, not realizing that those systems are for your benefit, not for anybody else's. You are only going to find the stuff that you're working on tomorrow because nobody else is going to do it. But that understanding is not there. How do you drive understanding? Is it incentification? Is it gamification? Is it all of those things? Is there one single system, or is there a direction that you can go ahead and put in? Yeah.
gonna try and shy away from giving specific solutions because it's very context dependent, as I said, and it's usually one thing that works in
Yes.
one place doesn't necessarily work in another place. But I'll tell you what these people had tried before. So they had forced the developers to accept that they've maintained the documentation, fill at least X number of characters in a document, which is a documentation document that needs to be filled. And people, they literally just copy the same code and put it on the documentation document just to get it done with, because the incentives are a little
Yeah.
skewed there. When you order Uber or a Ola cab and you cancel, they ask for the reason of cancellation. And there's a small pop-up
Mm-hmm.
that comes there. Nobody answers the right answer. You just want to get it
Correct.
done, right?
Yes.
So you just click some random.
Yes.
Same thing happens here where you're just filling it up because you're forced to fill it in, right? In that specific context, we used a little bit of AI and a couple of other things, something that's tied to their bonus structure, and a little bit of monitoring, peer-to-peer monitoring to fix that issue. But again, in a very similar context in another place, the solutions are super different. And it's same problem in a different tech company, the solution would be very different. Because, for instance, if some tech companies really promote a lot of individual contributions, while a lot of other companies work very much in teams. So again, all of
Yeah.
those things also really matter. As I said,
Yeah.
human behavior is super
Fair.
complex. So something that works in one context doesn't work in another. So sometimes we just have to like test it out, figure out what exactly is going on, and then come up with very specific solutions.
Fair. I would go on to using behavioral science to nudge people to do right things and wrong things. You could use either. Who decides, number one, fairness of the game? And do people really care about the fairness of the game? That is one. And second is, where does the buck stop? Like, you can create any kind of context on the ethical side of things. Even if you are doing it for good, it is still good. Like, again, I would still want to be privy to my own personal choice, dependent on what I want to do.
Yeah.
So who decides, where do you draw the line between what is ethical, what is non-ethical? And is there a right answer for this? Or it's again going to be context dependent?
So I absolutely love the whole ethical behavioral science conversation. It's so fun. It's also very subjective, and everyone has their own opinion here. So
Okay.
to me, some things are clearly wrong. Some things are clearly okay in my perspective. So I'll tell you what is wrong, what is right in my perspective. I go by the rule that if I'm nudging you to do something, very often I'm doing it without your knowledge. If you do find out that I'm nudging you to do that and you are upset, that means I'm doing the wrong thing. If you find out that I'm nudging you to do something and you're impressed and you're happy that I did that, I'm probably doing the right thing. So, firstly, is it aligned with what the end user actually wants? So, if you buy a gym membership at, let's say, a gym, the gym that I'm running, and I make you come to the gym every single day by using behavioral science, you'll probably be happy. So, that to me is a good problem to solve, right? But when let's say a food delivery company sends me a notification at night asking if I want cake, is something that I think is ethically wrong, and they do that. So those are the nudges that I would like clearly steer away from. And I'll give you a couple of other examples. When you buy a ticket on IRCTC, there is this very tiny fee which gets you an
Yes.
insurance. It's auto selected. So that to me, the first time I bought a ticket, I realized it after I bought the ticket. On one side, I was impressed how they tricked me into buying an insurance. On the other side, I was really disappointed because it cost me nothing, but that's something that I did not agree to. So I felt tricked. So that to
Yeah.
me is somewhere in the gray zone where you are making someone buy something that they were not interested in. So looking at it from a very business perspective, so let's say you are someone who sells chocolates on the street. Your goal is to sell as many chocolates as possible, right? But where and how you do that is where we behavioral science people come in. And currently, there is just one document which talks about these guidelines. It's called the Guidelines Against Dark Patterns. So they've identified a bunch of dark patterns, and the government has given guidelines on what is not allowed and what's allowed. So, for instance, when you book tickets on Book My Show, there's this auto edition of Book My
Yes.
Smile.
Charity.
It's
Yeah.
a small charity amount. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
that is illegal as well anymore. Like, that's not legal anymore. I think they've also removed it as the default that it used to be. So there's a bunch of things like that. Like auto defaults have been made illegal. Naming and shaming has been made illegal. So you can no longer tell your customers, I want insurance, versus the other option being, no, I don't want insurance. They have something like, no, I am willing to take the risk, or no, I don't want your cool product, I'm an uncool human. All of those are now illegal. So you can't play around with people's
You
emotions.
can't make them feel bad, essentially.
Yeah,
Oh,
you can't
okay.
make them feel bad and push them into making certain choices. You can't create fake scarcity, which to me is like obvious. Don't do that. So there's a bunch of such behavioral biases that has been misused for a long time that's been banned. But again, this ban is very vague. Nobody knows what to do when someone actually uses it. How do you complain? Who do you complain to? It's all a little unclear.
Yeah.
But I think that is a very good initiative. But that said, I still see a lot of dark patterns. And I want to touch upon one last thing here. So we call it libertarian paternalism. So paternalism is when you tell someone what to do, right?
Yeah.
But you also want to give them the freedom of choice. So you might have heard how the height in which stuff is placed in supermarket affects your
Yes.
propensity to buy.
Yes.
So children's stuff is usually kept at their eye level so that they end up picking it up. And you know how chocolates are kept near the checkout counter, so you end up picking it up. So
Yeah.
if you think about it, this architecture of how these choices are presented to you, there has to be a way in which they're presented, right? So in some way or the other, they have to put all this stuff on the shelves in one way or the other. And nobody is really forcing you to buy something versus the other. So to me, that is a gray zone that I am okay with. So maybe not chocolates and cigarettes by the checkout counter, but I'm okay with people putting more expensive or the stuff that they get the most money on at my eye level. I know it's like tricking me, but I'm okay with that. So that is where I would draw the line. And again, that said, each person draws the line in a different way, which is terrible. I think there has to be a regulatory body that should tell where to draw the line. We recently worked with a supermarket, it's been a while, but we worked with a supermarket where we realized that they put the chocolates on the near the checkout counter. And what we actually found in our study is that the kids were asking for the chocolates, and these are all super expensive, the typically expensive chocolates of Ferrero Rocher and like Snickers and all of
Yeah.
those get there. And it's really embarrassing for these parents to say no, because everyone's
Yeah.
standing right there. There's so many people around you, and your kid's just asking for this one tiny little chocolate. So they're forced or peer pressure into buying it. So
Yeah.
that to me again is
It's a
no,
dark
no.
pattern.
So
Yeah. A good point. With context, that's actually a crazy nudge, in my opinion. Yeah, it should not like it. Wow. Are there any crazy creative nudges that you've come across that you were like the good ones, not the dark ones, the good
okay.
ones that you've gone, wow, this is so cool. Yeah, like your supermarket example, the one that I came across was in Japan. What they did was so essentially smoking is a big stigma in Japan. Japanese people smoke a lot. And the idea was that if somebody stares at you, you know that you get conscious. So the idea was that if you find somebody smoking, or if you find somebody who looks like a person who's not an adult, like below 18 or below 21, actually picking up a cigarette, the entire everybody should stare at that individual so that they get conscious about what they're doing. And is that a dark thing? Actually, I don't know. Now that you're essentially making them feel conscious and bad, but it is also a good thing. I don't know actually. Now
Yeah,
it becomes very blurry.
it's the whole idea of naming and shaming, and it was used a lot during the open defecation eradication programs, where people who were resorting to open defecation were openly named and shamed to stop that behavior. Again, to me, that I was very strongly convinced that was the right thing to do before we actually went into the field and worked with those people. And we realized that there's a lot more reasons why people actually resort to open defecation. And it's not
Yeah.
as simple as black and white as we typically see. Yeah. My favorite example, not a dark pattern, but my favorite behavioral science nudge is the whole engagement ring thing, where people were
Okay.
told that you need to spend X amount of your X percentage of your income on an engagement ring to really show your partner that you love her. And before that, people would buy very cheap engagement rings, apparently. But then were forced to buy these diamonds and like super expensive diamonds to really show their girlfriends that they really love them. So I think that they actually gave a specific number. I can't remember it now, but there is a very specific number on how much percentage of your income you need to spend on the engagement ring. And that sticked so well. And it's very powerful, right? Because that's literally you quantifying how much you love your partner. And if you buy a cheap one, your partner's going to be pissed, so potentially pissed. So to me, that is a very strong behavioral science nudge that they use that stuck for so many years throughout the world. Yeah.
But see, now again, with context, this can be turned in the other way and looked at in a dark way, that I'm making you feel guilty about not spending enough because now I'm making you feel that you don't care as much. And that could again be looked at as a dark thing, that, everything to
Absolutely.
be
Yeah.
honest, that comes to be transactional, anything and everything would then be looked up as a dark pattern.
Yeah, the specific thing is actually not doing anyone any good. Yeah, there are only few things that there's a lot of behavioral science stuff that is definitely good. Like for instance, there was this project that was done in Mumbai where people were crossing these local train stations without climbing through the what do you call it, the overhead bridge. So they would just run across
Mm-hmm.
the axe when the trains are coming. And a lot of people die that way. So there were like a
Mm-hmm.
bunch of behavioral science nudges that were used there to stop people from doing that. And we have personally worked on some projects that are very interesting. Like during COVID, we worked on a bunch of vaccination issues. We worked on social distancing stuff. And in general, we've also worked on making how do we make children stay in school. And it might seem like a very financial problem, but it's actually a big psychology problems of how the parents look at stuff. I spoke about time inconsistency and instant gratification, right? It's pretty much the same thing. Do you make your child work now and make money, or do you let your child study and then make money much later? So we have worked on such problems. We've also worked on, we are now trying to work on reducing Bangalore traffic. Uh,
Wow, that's a crazy. Wow,
yeah,
that is very ambitious.
very
Very
small
ambitious.
parts of it, but if I can make my life better, I'm going to do it forever. But yeah,
If you can update, that would be very cool. Whatever solution that you do come up with, or a string of solutions, a string of small
yeah,
nudges that you should update. Do you have
absolutely,
a
yeah,
blog, or do you put it on LinkedIn, or just send out a newsletter on the
yeah.
kind of things that you
So we
could
do have a
work,
newsletter where we
you know?
put these social ventures and other research findings that we find. So this one is a non-profit project that we're doing. So this one will be published publicly. So yeah.
Just to touch up on this part, that sometimes it feels that if you're doing for something transactional, it feels wrong, and if you're doing it for a social cause, it feels right, but the implementation is still the same.
Yeah, but not necessarily. Like, for instance, I used behavioral science when I negotiated my salary every single time. It's transactional, and I think it's fine. I don't think it's bad. So it's not
Yeah,
necessarily, not all business problems, working on all business problems are wrong as well, right? Like, at the end of the day, people need to sell more and make more money. So if I use the right kind of
yeah.
words that makes people purchase sooner than later, then I think that's fine. But it's just about, is it actually having a negative consequence on their life? Then I should probably not sell it to them. So if I sell, let's say, iPhones, and I'm making people purchase iPhones. Apple, for instance, uses amazing behavioral science in every single ad that they put out, every single stuff, including the package of their products. There's a lot of behavioral science everywhere. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. It's a great thing. It gives me a great experience when I buy the product. So it's not necessarily transactional is bad. It's just about transactional nudges which are not aligned with the end user's interest. So, for instance, if you're someone who's trying not to junk eat at night and I'm sending you a notification every night to eat junk, that is bad. But if I send you a notification in the morning asking if you want breakfast, that's fine. So it's just about,
Yeah,
are you causing harm or not, in my opinion. Yeah.
yeah. All right. If people understand, like, what is their inclination to be allowed to be played by behavioral science nudges, if that is a. If they understand that there is something going on, some magic is going on, that I'm being conned into a situation. As you said, it could be that if, like, for your personal principle, if people understand that they've been conned, but conned and they're okay with them being conned, then you don't mind doing it as against if they're not okay. And my question though is that once they understand the system, d- does their thought process change?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Firstly, I would not use the word conned. But yeah, if
Okay,
someone
fair.
does know that there's some behavioral science being used on them, it does reduce its intensity. For instance, if you become a little more aware of what all is being used on you, like for instance, if you know that they've intentionally selected something as the default option for you, you're slightly more likely to change, but majorly no. So behavioral
Hmm.
science tricks or nudges, whatever you want to call it, works on behavioral science people.
Hmm.
It's just that I know that they're using the trick on me and then I get tricked. Like I've seen it so many times happen to me. I'm like looking at it and I name the bias that the intervention they've used, and they're using social proof on me. Okay, I'm gonna fall for the social proof. So it still works to an extent, and there's a lot of interesting research that's been done in these areas where people have found out that do not just work when people know that they're being nudged, and it does. Yeah.
It does.
It
I mean,
works
it,
slightly
like,
less
I,
effective, but it still works.
but it still elicits the same feeling, even if you know that you're being nudged, you still. That's fascinating. That should mean that ideally you should not. I don't know. Like, it shouldn't ideally surprise you. You should know what to expect.
Yeah, but let's take that supermarket checkout example, right? Like they know that the chocolates are kept there to make their life difficult when they were their children. But what do? You're there, you still fall for it, right? So it still works. Yeah.
Yeah, that is what is fascinating, is what I'm saying, that it shouldn't
That's
work.
also,
It shouldn't.
that's also a good thing though, right? So when you have positive nudges to make your life easier, it works for you as well. So for instance, when I'm trying to build habits, I always have a very physically visible tracking chart on
Mhm.
my wall, and I like
Mhm.
very religiously go and color my boxes red or green based on if I did it or not. And I
Right.
know exactly what behavioral science is playing a role in it, and I know it's very stupid and very immaterial, and I know that I'm going to tear it off and throw it away in a month, but it still works. So I think it working is actually fascinating, but also a really good thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Isn't that what it is? The repeatability of outcomes of behavior would allow you to then implement similar structures so that you can the similar behavior somewhere else. So yeah, it does make sense on the implementation side. I'm just fascinated by how we behave, even if we know that this is what is happening, and the experience and the feeling that we get is still the same. It means that we can even nudge ourselves into getting that, and creating habits can become that understanding of, yeah, theek hai, like tomorrow if I have to go to the gym and I'm too lazy, maybe I'll sleep with socks on. Maybe I'll keep my bag at my feet so that the first thing I see. And that's essentially nudging me. So I'm hacking my own thought process because I know that tomorrow I am going to feel lazy. And there is one thing that I have to do less by sleeping in my socks instead of putting them on.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Like I
Yeah.
use all these on myself all the time. I leave my gym bag in the car because I take my car to go, and I'm not bringing it to my house because I know that's one extra thing I need to do. Now I just have to literally go to the car. If I want to go to the gym, I
Yeah.
just go to the car. I have my gym clothes there,
Yeah.
and everything is always there. So yeah, I'm glad that it works.
Yeah, it does. What would have happened though? What would have happened if we couldn't track our outcomes to repeatability? What would have happened? Like, h- how do you think all of this would have changed? How do you think that if behavioral science did not exist, or our ability to use our predictability of behavior did not exist, what would have happened? Very hypothetical question, but
As in humans become very unpredictable, or
yeah,
field of
humans
behavioral
become
science.
very unpredictable.
Okay.
Y-
Then I would be jobless for starters. And I think that is a very hypothetical case that wouldn't
Ve-
exist. And just to touch upon your first point of if behavioral science did not exist, nothing would change because I think behavioral science has been used even before things got formalized. Like I keep talking to
Correct.
people how these small shops in the small streets in residential areas, they use so much behavioral science on you. Like there used to be two shops in my parents' house when I was young, and one was really close, another one was far. The one far away was super nice to me, so I would walk further to go to that shop rather than the one nearby. While the first shop person is super chatty, and I'm not very chatty, so I don't like that person so much. The other person's just nice to me, and I only thing big difference that he did was when I was really young, he once gave me a free chocolate. I
So he
religiously
bribed
walked to
you
that shop
essentially.
every single time for years. So that chocolate was probably like huge returns for him. But yeah, like everybody uses
Yeah, it
behavioral science
worked.
all the time. Students, when they when I talk to students, I tell them about how when they want to go to Goa, there's like a right time to ask their parents. There's a wrong time to ask their parents. There's a right way to ask. There's a wrong way to ask, and we all know that we have really hacked all of these psychology concepts really well. So
Yeah,
even without giving
yeah,
them names, which behavioral science as a field did, we knew it. We
yeah.
just didn't know what to call it.
So essentially, you're using it, and putting a label to it is just happened right now, and studying it as a science is just happening now, but you've been implementing it much, and you've been getting away with it, and
Yeah, I think humans have been using behavioral science since the start of time. It's just that labeling it made it a little easier for us to replicate stuff and use stuff from one context to another. So,
I guess that I the labeling has a more transactional value to it than anything else. Like I would assume that using it for social and pro-social would anyway you would identify it as behaviors that you would want to change, but businesses don't talk about behavior in that sense. They talk about aspirations and ambitions, and eh, in a sense are also behaviors, but they don't understand. Yeah, and I think there is a lot of potential to. I would assume and I would consider that if I were to open my own university, I would have that. This as number one, interpersonal reaction, interpersonal management of relationships, and why people do the like what they do, and
Yeah, yeah. In fact, I think this is one of the core basic human skills. It's so useful everywhere. Like you are fighting with
it
someone,
is.
how do you solve it? You are getting a job, how do you negotiate your salary? You are trying to plan something, how do you plan? How do you build habits? How do you break bad habits that you have? And in that way, I really think it should be taught at school level. It's why are we learning all those complex quantum mechanics when we should be learning how to talk to people? So yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
if I can
But
change
then
that.
to take you back to the like how we started this conversation without there being any frameworks. And again, I'm guessing that the more you experience life itself, the more you, and if you have a learning mindset and if you have a optimizing mindset, you would then realize to create things that work for you. So even if it is taught in school, it may not be applicable to you if you do not know how to use it.
Yeah, but I do
Who
think
decides?
even mediocre behavioral scientists know these skills a lot better than someone who's never read a behavioral science book. So it's
I
really,
understand. But
yeah.
with that said, what is your what drives you to be so passionate in this field? What is the what is your core motivation? See, it's a crazy field. It's economics, and they're all fields in themselves, economics and psychology and business and consultancy and advertising, marketing, HR. eh,
Yeah.
it's horizontal more, and I don't know if anybody could be equally good vertically as they could be. Don't you get overwhelmed? Number one, what drives you to be this way? And yeah,
Yeah.
what do you think is your
So,
purpose in life?
yeah. So I think
Three
this is
questions, yeah.
something a lot of people can empathize with. When I finished my schooling, when I had to pick my college, there were just so many courses that I wanted to pick. There was so many stuff that I wanted to do. Like I wasn't able to pick
Yeah.
a particular course or do something. So that way, I'm really glad that I ended up in this field because I actually really learning all of these different stuff. And while it's like a V shape in terms of like horizontal learning and vertical learning. So there are some aspects of stuff that I go really deep into and like really get the nuances and the nitty gritty details, while I touch upon like a bunch of other stuff. And it's particularly very much applicable to my life right now because as a consulting firm, you end up working with so many different kinds of clients. So, for instance, we're working with this insurance
Yeah.
firm in the US, and we ended up learning about how the healthcare system in the US works. Something that I really didn't think I'd be learning about, but it's really fun.
Yeah.
So, if you're someone who's very curious and like small little things that are very unrelated drives you, then I think this is an amazing place to be in. So, yeah, it's not overwhelming per se because you're not bombarded with information. You seek information, and I think there's a big difference, right? So, for instance, if I'm trying to fix a specific behavior of mine, and I'm diving into various aspects, let's say some anthropology related research, some psychology related stuff, some neuroscience related stuff, I am seeking this information, so I am getting it in a very organized, sequential order. So I typically don't feel overwhelmed, except when I have all the possible causes that could drive a particular behavior, and like I'm in the middle of, we call it the messy middle, which is like you have your problem, you have your solution. To go from your problem to solution, you have this messy middle part where you have no clue what's going on and what's affecting what and what's not affecting, but you still have it in the equation, and you have to weigh them all. That's a part where it gets overwhelming. But if you're someone who's really curious and actually trying to find the solution, then it's still fun. Yeah.
But don't you think that leads you to a rabbit hole of information that sometimes is I during COVID, we used to have a lot of free time, and this was what I was really interested in. And it got me thinking on neuroscience levels and consciousness levels, and where does it? And then for me, it was more like systems and human behavior and implementing them and realizing what drives people and what should we incentivize and what shouldn't we punish, and everything is connected. So how do you manage, like you mentioned that you were seeking information more than being surprised by it, but like I used to get the feeling of not knowing anything when I used to do my research about these fields and these topics. So if you do not resonate, how do you manage that?
I think I was also exposed to the field in a very safe environment, in the sense that I did a proper master's in behavioral science. So they like made me sit in a chair and taught me the basics. That really helped for sure. I think that was probably why I wasn't overwhelmed, because the course was just so structured and everything was ordered and thought. I actually did my first research project, or the first time tried to solve something. That's probably it. And I would suggest people to also actually, it's really fun to just dive into stuff, but it's also sometimes really nice to pick these really good university syllabus and just go through the structure that they have and then try to follow it as you're learning. But yeah, that's probably the difference that we had.
Yeah, I would assume that in the end, structured learning does give you a path, even if it is not like, at least it doesn't make you feel that's the framework that is required just to start off with it so that you don't feel out of place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think education
Okay.
system, although
Okay.
it's like really messy and screwed up, I think it does give you a nice structured way of learning stuff.
I just have this one thing to say. I was speaking to this architect earlier, and crazy dude. He had created software of his own and created his own architecture software because he was not happy with the software that was natively available. And he was like, "Here, you should understand that nature does not understand systems and structures. And when a child is born into this world, it interacts with the world as how it is born, and it is not like you." Like nature doesn't understand linearity of progress. It'll be like a flower is blooming. It'll not say tomorrow that one petal will come, then second petal will come, then third petal will come. But then that being said, we still find it better to learn in a structured way, which is fascinating to me because I will still feel overwhelmed if I'm exposed to all this information together.
What you could possibly do is you could just pick stuff that's interesting for you. Like, for instance, if you're trying to build a habit, you can just dive into the habit building literature, which is, although interconnected to
Yeah.
everything else, behavioral science, it's still a small subsection. You can like
Right.
maybe dive into them topic by topic or stuff that's
Not get
relevant.
into. Yeah. On that note, I think I'm done with all my questions.
Awesome.
It was very cool talking. I have actually I wanted to do this before I got into working at the place that I wanted to work, behavioral economics and nudge. And I actually spoke to Danny really before your interview, and pretty fascinating this field is. And as much as we can leave as many stones turned in our ways of doing things, and I think behavioral science is that magic. The dark patterns that people don't realize is is a bad consequence, but I think good consequence is that it does work out like magic.
Yeah.
Um,
There's a lot of good behavioral science stuff that's been used everywhere, and we keep saying good design is design that you don't see. So, good behavioral science nudges are nudges that you don't even realize are around you. For instance, I'll give you a very simple example. A push door should not have a handle. A pull door should have a handle, right? So that's a design that
yeah.
nobody who's using would realize. But if a door doesn't have a handle, you're not going to pull it, you're going to push it, right? That to me is good design. When I look at behavioral science nudges, again, I try to think of nudges that are not too visible, something that's very much integrated in the environment and design. So sometimes these positive nudges are not that visible because they're very much in the environment, hopefully.
Yeah, so if it's good design, you should not. Yeah, it's wow. On that note, Junofy, thank you so much for taking out the time and giving me so much of
Happy
your
to be
time.
here.
Thank you so much for tuning in, you guys. If you like this, then you can hit the like button. The algorithm likes it, gives me more views, and maybe I can contemplate on keeping this channel for free.
for you to see. If you hit the subscribe button, the algorithm likes that as well. But unlike the like button, this is more useful because you'd be actually notified by every time we do drop a video on this channel. If you have any complaints regarding the content that we drop or the questions that we ask, or you want to give us any suggestions with questions or people that you want us to interview, we have added a feedback form in the description. You are very welcome to fill that up and let me know. If you hated this content and you do not want to see my face ever again, and do not want to share it with anybody, and do not want to refer this kind of content with anyone, then until you do tune in to my next episode or my last episode, or you do tune in, I would like to wish you, in Truman Burbank's very own words, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Cheers.